Hi guys, welcome to PT1 Game 3. For a lot of you, this is going to be the first time you see a game solved the whole way out, so I don't expect total comprehension, just kind of watch the flow of it and start grasping some of the concepts about which variables have to be in which order relative to each other, which is the essence of sequencing rules. So I'm looking at this game and I've got 8 partners in a law firm and there's no sense of order to that. So I think right away that that's going to be my game pieces. That's going to be what I'm ordering. So I draw those out in a list of my game pieces and add it up to this area right here. So here it is drawn out. I've got 8 of them. They're going to be dropping into my spots. What about my game board? For that, I want to pick the variables that have an inherent sense of order, and that's these years 1961 through 68. I'm not going to mess around with writing 1968, 1961 between all of these, and then 1962 and get 8 spots that way. That's going to be really messy. So what I want to do is just do 1 through 8, nice and simple. And here that is. Notice we've got 8 game pieces, and they're going in 8 spots on the board. We'll call that a balanced game later on in your lessons. For now, all you need to know is that exactly one of these goes in each of these spots. Now that I've got the game pieces and the board all written out, it's time to handle the rules. And usually you write the rules kind of right up here next to the game board. However, on sequencing games where it's just a bunch of sequencing rules, generally you're going to form a big chain. So it's best to have those down at the bottom where you got a lot of space to make it. So I started out knowing that Hodges joined the firm before Nader. So I just get a nice sequencing rule just like that. It shows us that anytime we see these two in the order, the H has to be before the N, no matter what. Next rule, King before James, same idea. This next one gets a little trickier. Both N and J have to be before G. They get hired earlier than G. The next rule, N's before O. I'm not even thinking about who got hired first or whatever. I'm just thinking of it as a spatial relationship, N before O. And we add this O on, and it's important to note that there's no relationship between that O and the G, right? You can't draw a straight line between them. It's a broken line. However, the O does have to be before the H and the N. You can draw a nice straight line between those two. If you're forgetting this stuff already, take a peek back in the lesson where we have it all drawn out. For the next rule, we have James joining the firm before McNeil. And again, that's the same as the O. That M's going to have to be behind both the K and the J, but there's no relationship to G or any of these other variables. Because you can't draw a straight line getting to any of these. You're zigzagging all over the place. Only K and J have the relationship with M. Last rule, G before I. Last rule, G before I. I wanted to make that G a little prettier. Let's make that I prettier too. And then we've got it. This is our chain here. And later you'll learn some techniques with how to do restrictions that might help you out. But for now, we're just going to use this chain to attack this. And all you have to do is use your picture to understand what has to be in front of what. And if you want to stop and practice, you can look at a given variable and figure out who has to be behind it. It's everything you can draw a straight line between without bending back. So I, for example, you can draw a straight line to G, N, H, to G, J, K. But if you try to go to O, it'll bend back. And that means there's no relationship between I and O. They can be in whatever order relative to each other. And you'll see that play out more as we attack the questions. Let's get down to that. Okay, 14's asking us to find something that cannot be true. And it's an early question in the game, which means generally we're looking for something that jumps right out at us. You're making a mistake if you try out an order for each one of these answer choices, and you'll see that right away here. Look, H in 1 is answer choice A. There's no reason why H can't be in 1 because no variable has to go before it. So rather than trying out a whole order here, I'm going to move on and look for something that I can see much faster cannot be true. How about H in 3? Any problem with that? H looks like it'd be a natural fit in 3. You could have like KJ in front of it. There's only 3 variables that have to go behind H, and there's plenty of room for them. So again, I'm moving on, and I'm looking for something that jumps out at me. How about G and 4? G and 4 looks much more promising. We try to stick G and 4 here, and we quickly see that there's 4 variables that have to be behind G. Yet we've only got 3 spots right here. There's not going to be room for it. Try H, N, K. There's no room now to put the J, and we're in trouble. So it cannot be true that G is 4th. And that's your first taste of being able to see, with your diagram, how many things are stuck behind a variable. This is a common theme that you see over and over again in ordering games. For 15, we're told a new piece of information, which we'll talk about later, how questions are structured. This is what's known as a local question. So we get some information that just applies to this question. James joined the firm in 62. So we pop him in 62, and then looking down at our chart, we then know K has to be in front of J. And then, much like the last question, we got to figure out what cannot be true in this situation. So it's going to be the same process. How about H and 3? Again, that looks perfectly natural. H and 3, nothing has to be in front of H, so it looks like that should work out. There's plenty of space for the things that have to go behind H. It's an early question, so we're still just looking for an easy answer. How about M and 3? Again, M and 3, KJ have to be back behind it, and we've already got that all set up, so everything's looking fine. I'm going to move along looking for an answer that jumps out at me that cannot be true. How about H and 4? Again, not really raising any alarms. There's 3 things that have to be behind it, and it looks like there's plenty of room for that. How about N in 64? Again, pop the N in here. 1 thing has to be in front of it, and there's room for that. So I'm going to keep moving on and hope E raises some alarms. How about Owen in 64? That's answer choice E. I pop Owen in there, and then I see 2 things have to be behind it. You can draw a straight line to these 2, but there's only 1 space left. H and N won't both be able to fit, and we know that this cannot be true. E's our right answer. 16 is a middle question. Generally, they're not going to be terribly hard. It's the last 2 questions that tend to give you the most difficulty. Here, we're asked what the latest year that James could join the firm is. Take a look at James, and then what are the variables we can draw a straight line to? G, I, M. These are all things that have to be behind James. So the latest we could have James is 65. And we'll just pop this in. If you want to, you can confirm and order out, make sure it works. JMGI. We got to get K in front of M, then H, N, O. Everything works fine here. So the latest we can get James is 65. You try to put him any later, you won't have room for these 3 MGI that have to be behind him. And that gives us an answer of 65, D as the correct answer choice. How about 17? Here we've got O joining the firm in 65, and then M joining the firm in 67. And immediately I take a look at that. We can get, these 2 are taken care of, right? So we're just looking kind of at this and how these are going to fit in. Well, HN have to be behind O, but that's still not telling us a whole lot about this order. We know HN's back here. We know KJ is behind M. What a veteran is able to see here is that there's 4 things that have to be behind G and I. HN, K, and J, right? And that means G and I is going to have to pop into these 2 spots right here, and then all this mess is going to be behind it. HN, K, J, but we don't know anything about the orders of those, right? So the question's asking us, how many partners can we know exactly what year they joined the firm other than O and M? It's only going to be G and I. This is a good practice question for getting used to looking at these chains down here and forming a strong mental image of how that's going to pop into your order. and we come up with an answer of 2, and that's B. We know the exact year that 2 other partners joined the firm. For 18, I've got a new rule, so that makes this a slightly tougher question. We now know that Owen joined the firm before McNeil. So this whole O-N-H chain here has to be behind the M. So I rewrite it like this. N still has to be behind G. This all still applies, but now I'm looking at M, and what has to be behind it? A whole bunch of stuff, right? So then they ask us, what's the earliest that McNeil could join the firm? We know that these 5 variables have to be in front of it. So that means the earliest you could have McNeil in is here in 66. If you want, you can do out an order to make sure it works fine. O, K, J. I'm just randomly putting things in, making sure that they still follow this order, and it works out just fine. Try to get M any earlier, and you won't have room for all these variables that now need to be behind it. So that gives us 66 as our answer. That's the earliest year that McNeil could join the firm, D. Okay, so if that made your head spin a bit, what you should do is sit down and play around with this game and get very good at determining which variables have to be behind or in front. And remember your straight line technique that you learned in the lesson. Say I'm looking at I can draw a straight line to G, J, K, H, N. All those things have to be behind I. And you can do that analysis with any variable working both forwards and backwards. I look at H, for example. Sorry, this is getting messy. And there's 3 things that have to be in front of it, N, G, and I. So play around with that, play around with some orders, and you'll start to develop the ability in your brain to see these relationships more clearly. Okay, catch you on the next lesson.